Late 19th century accounts of British colonial justice in India often emphasize a serene, detached authority. The rhetoric projects a civilized administration dispensing fair laws to a vast empire over afternoon tea. Beyond this facade, the mechanism of control relied on physical isolation. Mass incarceration was a gritty reality, built on dust, iron, and rigid confinement. This system was particularly active in the northwestern provinces and Oudh in early 1886. The operational logic of this empire lives inside its internal paperwork, the mundane, everyday records that dictated how millions were actually managed on the ground. These files reveal a system preoccupied with standardization and optimization. Here, the colonial prison functioned as much as a bureaucratic firm as it did a place of punishment. At the top of this regional hierarchy was Inspector General R.T. Hobart. From a central office in Lucknow, Hobart commanded a sprawling network of local jail superintendents. Scive-specific administrative circulars issued by Hobart between January and March of 1886 provide a direct look at his methods. These documents show a central executive attempting to micromanage a decentralized, inefficient local prison network. Hobart's control relied on three primary tools: enforcing rigid criminal taxonomies, optimizing the movement of prisoners, and demanding aggressive labor accounting. To Hobart, a prisoner represented a security threat to be categorized, a logistical burden to be minimized, and a unit of economic value to be tracked on a spreadsheet. The prison system inherited a significant intelligence problem from local police forces and courts. Identifying and processing individuals correctly caused constant administrative friction. Central administrators were increasingly frustrated by localized failures, often citing specific complaints passed up the chain of command from regional magistrates. Hobart issued Circular No. 5 on February 2nd to address this breakdown. He begins with a sharp reprimand, pointing directly to the loose and inaccurate manner in which local jail officials were compiling their reports. This text highlights a major logistical failure. Recidivists, or habituals, were arriving at jails unidentified. It was left to the jailers to recognize these repeat offenders after they had already been processed as first-timers by the police and courts. This intelligence failure had direct political consequences. Hobart notes that these inaccuracies were a cause of severe criticism on the part of government, threatening the administration's reputation for order. Local intelligence was unreliable enough that jail superintendents were effectively forced to act as a retroactive detective agency. Correcting this gap required stripping away local judgment. Hobart replaced intuition with a rigid mathematical definition of what constituted a repeat offender. 1 month later, he issued Circular No. 8, commanding superintendents to overwrite the existing definition of a habitual in their prison manuals. This new definition used a multi-step logic gate to automate classification. The first condition required the prisoner to be convicted under specific chapters of the Indian Penal Code, mostly relating to offenses against property or coinage. If that criteria was met, the flowchart moved to a second threshold. The offense must have been punishable by at least 3 years of imprisonment. However, the order included a subjective bypass. A first-class magistrate could ignore the math and simply label a subject a professional bully or habitual thief. The habitual criminal functioned as an engineered bureaucratic category. Its primary purpose was to force standardized reporting out of chaotic, decentralized jurisdictions. Moving these categorized bodies across the provinces required managing the high costs of mass transit infrastructure. Circular No. 6 deals exclusively with the logistics and costs of these transfers. Hobart opens with a financial concern, noting that the charges for moving prisoners had become excessive. His solution was corporate in nature. He directed superintendents to actively negotiate and exploit volume discounts, or concessions, offered by commercial railway companies. This text reveals the mandated formula. To maximize the discounts, prisoners were to be moved in batches of 10 men, inclusive of their guards. These transit costs were significant enough that Circular Number 1 restricted the transfer of low-level, non-laboring prisoners entirely to avoid unnecessary administrative expense. Human movement was governed by a strict cost-benefit analysis. Prisoners were treated as cargo, grouped to secure the best possible rates from the railways. Inside these prisons, the focus shifted to the extraction of labor value. Large-scale penal infrastructure operated as a state-run economic firm. Circular Number 7 was an urgent directive meant to standardize how the value of this labor was reported. Hobart notes a great misapprehension regarding how prison labor was being recorded, leading him to issue a mandatory new accounting template. This ledger established a specific formula to demonstrate the jail's profitability. Superintendents first recorded the actual material costs and cash spent on a prison labor project. They then compared this to the DPW rates, the estimated cost of completing that same work using free labor at public market rates. This chart shows the final calculation. The difference between the market rate and the jail's outlay was recorded in column 8 as the officially extracted value of prison labor. The operational goal of the colonial prison was to offset its own financial burden through double-entry bookkeeping and the rigorous use of unpaid labor. This bureaucratic system spanned the entire province, connecting the grand gates of colonial Lucknow to the smallest rural lockups. Maintaining this administrative grip required a vast, unending volume of rigid taxonomies, complex transit formulas, and aggressive labor audits. This paperwork served a dual purpose. While it categorized inmates, Hobart's circulars were primarily designed to discipline the local jail superintendents themselves. This is epistolary governance. The British Empire maintained its grip on vast territories through the standardization of forms, the formatting of ledgers, and the rapid deployment of these printed circulars. In 1886, colonial power was sustained more than just brick walls and armed guards. It relied on the relentless enforcement of the administrative spreadsheet.